All right. Today, we're going to talk about interest groups, which is the subject of the chapter that you would be reading right now, if you're kind of keeping pace. Previously, we had done political action committees, and there was the question about what the difference between an interest group and political action committee is. And so let's do that first. Interest groups can be all different kinds. Some of the common ones you might have heard of and know about would be maybe Emily's List, which is a women's rights group. Greenpeace is one. The NRA, National Rifle Association. Those are some pretty common ones, but there are a lot of them. In fact, every interest has an interest group. Anyway, so interest groups exist to shape policy, whereas political action committees or super PACs even exist to raise and spend money on elections. That's it. That's all they exist to do, raise and spend money on elections. They attempt to get their policy kind of the way they want it through getting candidates elected and things like that. But they're a money mechanism. That's all they are. They're set up to collect money and spend it. Interest groups, however, actually do things. They have employees. They have tools available to them. So they exist to shape policy in a variety of different techniques. Most interest groups, it's worth noting, do have at least one PAC associated with them. So like, for example, if you consider the California Teachers Association, which is actually a union, but it's also an interest group. It does these things. It does what interest groups do to kind of shape state policy. Not only does the CTA have its own PAC, but each kind of child district, like us, Eastside or whatever, our union has its own PAC that will then support the CTA as well. Not 100%, but generally speaking, when the CTA tells us, the ESTA PAC, which is what we are, and I'm actually on that committee, when they say, hey, we endorse this candidate, then our PAC generally says, okay, so we'll support them or even give them money. But interest groups do way more stuff. They use many techniques. We're going to focus on the three they show in the book, which are lobbying, litigation, and electioneering. We'll start with lobbying. Okay. And I apologize for the lo-fi nature of this, being pen on paper. These are supposed to replace lectures. And I would use the board like this, and I feel more comfortable just kind of being able to write stuff and highlight and do whatever than trying to put together a PowerPoint and then have my voice overlay, and that's a time investment of like fivefold. And I'm limited by bandwidth and all those other things. Anyway, lobbying. So lobbying is actually exactly what it sounds like. What it is it's people that, it got the term from back in the old days. Lobbyists that work for interest groups would hang out at the lobby of a congressional building at Capitol Hill and would kind of wait for lawmakers to pass by, and they would kind of just harass them and try to shape policy by talking to them. There's really nothing magical to it. It's literally just lobbyists go and sit and have meetings with lawmakers and try to convince them that what they're doing is good or bad or whatever. The key to lobbying is who the lobbyists are. Lobbyists make a lot of money. They're paid lots of money by interest groups because, generally speaking, to be a good lobbyist, you have to have access. If I were to wait outside Zoe Lofgren's office to meet with her, she probably wouldn't meet with me. And if she wouldn't take anything I had to say seriously. So I would not be a good lobbyist. Who would be a good lobbyist would be somebody that a lawmaker would be willing to take a meeting with and would be willing to listen to. So the most common lobbyists actually are generally former members of Congress. In fact, it has been argued that this is why members of Congress sometimes run for office. They run for office to hold office, and they put themselves on committees that get a lot of money, and we'll talk about that later. Some committees get a lot of donations and a lot of attention, some don't. Like the education committee, if you're on the education committee, nobody cares. But if you're on the armed services committee, you get lobbied like crazy from military manufacturers. So you get elected to Congress, put yourself on that committee, spend some time on that committee, and when you leave Congress, you go to a lobbying organization for military equipment, and they'll pay you a lot of money to lobby Congress. And you'll be effective because everybody there knows who you are. Everybody there knows that you know what's going on, and you've been on that committee before. They will take your call, they will meet with you, and you can influence their policy because you know what it takes to win those elections, and you know what help that your particular lobby can be to that, and so you can kind of leverage that. So that's what lobbying is. The next one, more complicated, is litigation. Litigation is a general term for basically anything having to do with courts. To litigate means to take it through the court system. While interest groups can't sue directly, they can engage in class action lawsuits. So, for example, let's say the NRA can't sue a government because they took an individual's gun away. But what they can do is do a class action lawsuit. Well, they could do two things, actually. They could do a class action lawsuit, or they can just actually support the primary, what's called a litigant. I'm actually going to start with this one. And here's a really good example. Consider the ACLU. This is their shtick. This is what they do. ACLU stands for American Civil Liberties Union. What they do is they go around and they try to defend people's civil liberties, and they spend a lot of money doing so, mostly through litigation. Whereas the NRA actually uses this, the ACLU uses this. All three of the techniques are more or less effective depending on what the interest group and what they do and what they're effective at, and we'll talk about that later. Anyway, the ACLU, what they'll do is, say somebody's civil rights were violated, say mine, and I want to sue, but say I'm suing McDonald's or Walmart or something big. The issue would be that I don't have the resources to effectively sue them. If you consider like the case of Farrager versus Boca Raton, the lifeguard probably didn't have the resources individually to sue the whole city of Boca Raton. The Boca Raton has enough resources they could just kind of outspend her and win. The ACLU, what they do is they jump in and they provide funding for that individual. So in that case, they're not creating a class action lawsuit. They're supporting the primary litigant by funding the case, maybe offering their lawyers, whatever. And in fact, Emily's List and or the National Organization of Women probably, in the case of Farrager versus Boca Raton, supported that. If you consider like Brown versus Board, they were involved in that because the individuals just didn't have the money, the resources to take on the system. But the ACLU does, so they support through that. The other thing they can do is what's called the class action. Class action, basically, while an interest group can't sue directly, what they can do is they can find a bunch of different people and lump them all together into one suit and sue on behalf of those people. So for you probably got invitations to be involved in a class action lawsuit and don't even know it, or you might know it but you didn't realize that's what it was. So generally speaking, a class action lawsuit, you'll get invited to. Say you bought a car, and that car had something faulty, and the company didn't do anything about it. I think this actually happened to Volkswagen. I don't remember. All the people that bought that car, instead of each individually suing the company, some consumer rights interest group, which there are a ton, can start the class action lawsuit, send out mail to everyone who's bought that car, and then what'll end up happening is everyone that joins is listed as a litigant, and then the interest group can engage in the class action lawsuit. They can take the lead on it because they're basically organizing it and supporting it. The most famous one that I can think of, the most hilarious one anyway, is Red Bull. So there was a class action suit against Red Bull, started by some interest group that was in favor of fair advertising. I don't know. They're out of their minds. But anyway, they sued Red Bull because the advertisement says Red Bull gives you wings. And clearly it doesn't. You don't fly. At least I never have. Although I've never tried, to be fair. And I'm not going to. But what that ended up happening was that the interest group sent out basically a class action lawsuit. They sued on behalf of everybody that's consumed Red Bull based on false advertising, and they won. And as a result, everyone who joined in, and you would get a letter and an email asking, you don't automatically get put on the list. Anyone that joined in got basically a free case of Red Bull, and they had to change their advertising. Anyway, that's what a class action lawsuit is. I can talk more about it later, or when we do a video review, you can ask further questions. But this video is on the long side already, so I want to move on. Amicus Curiae is the third tool, or sorry, well, yeah, I guess the third tool of litigation. And what that would be when the judges at the Supreme Court are doing their research, they have a bunch of people doing research for them. They take into consideration outside legal opinions from anyone noteworthy. So if you have some noteworthy lawyers or a well-respected legal team as part of your interest group, they could write a letter based on the existing case. So say the Supreme Court's hearing a case about right now gerrymandering. So an interest group can write a letter to the court from their legal team, making their argument available and their position. And if they are respected, which most of them are, the court will read it and take it in consideration. Sometimes interest groups will do the research for the Supreme Court. Hey, we found this data for you. You thought you might find it interesting, that kind of thing. Basically, so, I mean, if I wrote a letter to Ruth Bader Ginsburg asking her to rule in a particular way on a case, she might read it, she might take it in consideration, but probably not. But if I was a well-known lawyer that was supporting an interest group that she tends to feel strongly about or respect anyway, she's probably going to read it, and it could potentially influence her decision. And then the last one's electioneering. The last tool of interest groups that we're going to study is electioneering. And electioneering is basically attempting to manipulate elections, but for more than just spending, although you'll note PAC activity is one of them. But one of the main ways in which an interest group can influence elections is through what's called grassroots mobilization. And that is, interest groups have members. National Organization of Women is 52% of the population. The NRA is a couple million, and everything in between. Those members can go out and knock on doors, can go out and get people engaged and get more recruits to advocate, to basically get the movement out. And that includes using social media to try to mobilize. So interest groups are really good at that because unlike a PAC, interest groups aren't just spending money. They actually have a team. They have an organization. They have an army that they can go out and recruit people and spread the word. The next thing that they can do is publicize. Because again, they have kind of an institution available to them. They have an organization. They can use that to kind of manipulate the media, social media, knock on doors, whatever, to go out there and kind of shape policy through publicizing the issues that are important to them or trying to, make people feel a particular way about it. And then the last way would be PAC activity. That's obviously if an interest group has PACs, they'll use that to raise and spend money on candidates, which is separate from grassroots mobilization because that's the members going out and knocking on doors and doing things. This is actually spending money. So stay tuned for more. We'll do more, but just for now, that's the basic beginning of what interest groups do: lobbying, litigation, electioneering. The next one will be about what different types of interest groups and what their strengths and weaknesses are.